Hey guys, hoping all is well with everyone. So in this video we're going to be continuing our read-along of the Secret Zoo Traps and Specters, and in the last video we ended chapter 41. Just kind of a quick recap from the previous chapters. All the Descenders had kind of used their animal powers to have a different kind of approach to tracking down Degraff and keeping an eye on him as he was getting closer and closer to the secret zoo. And then at the very end, the chase had kind of had its last steps before it actually commenced. So it was like the actual gathering of all the Descenders in one place, and the scouts and the chase had actually started going after Degraff to finally kind of catch him once and for all. So we're going to start today with chapter 42, and without further ado, let's begin. Chapter 42, The Engravings. In the area that the tunnel had opened into, Tank stroked his flashlight beam along the wall. It was covered in slime and moss. Stringy green gunk dripped down its sides, and fog concealed its distant reaches. All along it were dark passages, like the one he had just walked through. Caves that led to unknown places. Tank had never seen this part of the secret zoo, and it made him nervous. Huge insects crawled across the walls. They moved in and out of the caves, their long bodies bending around curves. Tank saw something above the mouth of the tunnel down which he'd slid, a deep engraving in the hard dirt. Letters. Peering forward, he read the word Rhino-Rama. This made perfect sense because Tank had just portaled into the secret zoo through the rhino exhibit in the Clarksville Zoo. He moved the flashlight above a neighboring tunnel and noticed another deep engraving. Upon reading the words, he gasped and a jolt of terror surged across his body. The engraving named a spot that wasn't associated with the Clarksville Zoo or the secret zoo. The engraving read, Clarksville Elementary. Chapter 43, The Descenders Close In. As Sam softly touched on the rooftop, he closed his wings across his back and then dropped into the shadows of a wide chimney. The house faced Jenkins Street. To the right, about 15 rooftops down, was Clarksville Elementary. In the fog, it looked odd and somehow threatening. Tamron, Sam said into his bone mic. Yeah? I can see Clarksville Elementary, but not you. What's your position? Beside the bell tower. Sam squinted to see through the fog. Though he made out the shape of the tower, he couldn't spot his friend. How's the traffic down there? There isn't any. Just then, a figure came running up Jenkins Street. Fog whirled around a man in a trench coat and a fedora hat. Him. He's coming, Sam said. Everyone up. Solana, you keeping a visual? Roger, Solana said. Crouched low, she was running along the 5-inch cap of the concrete wall, the Clarksville Zoo to one side of her, the neighborhood to the other, as if she were rushing down the dividing line between two worlds. Directly to her right was Degraff, a row of houses and their lawns the only things dividing her from him. He moved in and out of Solana's view as trees, thick patches of fog, and other obstacles seemed to race past. Solana said, Who else has sight on the target? I got him, Hannah said as she touched down on a new rooftop beside a chimney, smoke twining around her body. She dropped to her rear and pressed her back against the cold stack of bricks. Directly across Jenkins Street was Clarksville Elementary. Hannah peered at the foggy bell tower for Tamron, but she couldn't see him. I'm across from the school, she said. By me? Tamron asked. Yep. Give me a visual. See the 2-story house blowing smoke? Hannah asked. Yeah? Hannah lifted her hand high and waved it in the stream-light white vapor. Hola! Perfect, said Sam. We have 'em on all sides. Hannah peered down Jenkins Street and watched the fog continue to break around Degraff. Sam, she said. How do you want to play this? I'm working on it, Sam answered. He was still crouched low on the rooftop, his silver feathers blanketing the shingles around him. "Hannah, you seeing anyone in the street?" "Negative." "Tamron, anyone on your end yet?" "Nope." "Then I'm going to take 'em," Sam said. "In the middle of the street?" Tamron asked. "We can do this right now," Sam said. "We can end this." Silence passed across the channel. Then Ella's voice came on. "He's right! Let's bring this guy down! If we get spotted, so what? We'll deal with it." Sam stood and scanned both ends of the street. Most of the porch lights were out. He charged down the rooftop, jumped over its edge, and snapped open his wings. After steering around a few tall trees, he coasted out above Jenkins Street. As he passed over the scouts, Degraff came into full view. He was running. About 50 feet in front of Sam, Clarksville Elementary rose from the fog. One of Sam's wings whapped a branch, and Degraff swung his shadowy face around. Seeing Sam, he lowered his head and picked up speed. "He's headed for the west entrance of the zoo!" Tam shouted into the airwaves. "Sam!" Hannah shouted. "Do it now!" Sam swept toward the street. With a thrust of his legs, 4 steel hooks sprang from each shoe. He sailed down, his talons aimed at Degraff's shoulders. But just as Sam struck, Degraff dove off the street and landed in a roll on the front lawn of Clarksville Elementary. Sam swung around in a wide circle, steering through the tall oaks, along the curb, and then crossing over Hannah. He saw Degraff charge toward the school, away from the zoo wall. "You guys seeing this?" After his friends answered yes, Solana asked, "What do you want us to do?" "Descend," Sam instructed. Chapter 44. The Fall of Tank. Tank stared at the engraving above the mouth of the tunnel. Clarksville Elementary. Was it possible that this passage actually connected to the Scouts' school? The thought filled him with dread. A deep growl came from behind him, and before he could react, something struck the side of his head. He collapsed to the ground and lay there, pain pushing through his temples, light flashing across his sight. The ring in his ears was deafening. As the side of his face slowly sank into the mud, a large, spiny insect squirmed onto his neck, leaving a trail of slime. The world gone sideways began to blur as he teetered on the edge of consciousness. Something moved into his vision. A foot. A foot the size of a child's torso. Mangy hair fell off its heel, sprouted between its toes, and dragged through the mud. Its nails were like swollen claws. A Sasquatch. Tank tried to move and couldn't. The world continued to gray, and the ringing became a low drone. He heard a voice behind him, a deep, gravelly voice that seemed to come from something less than human. "Now bring me the others." Something clutched Tank's ankles and hoisted his legs. A second later, he was being dragged backward. Mud oozed into his pockets and packed into his ear. Too stunned to resist, he watched the Sasquatch move into the tunnel marked Clarksville Elementary. Its shoulders slumped to fit beneath the low ceiling. The beast was followed by another, and another, and another. Before Tank could count their number, the drone in his ears stopped, and the world went black. Chapter 45. The Capture. As Noah veered off Jenkins Street and led the scouts onto Clarksville Elementary's courtyard in pursuit of Degraff, something appeared on the edges of his vision. He swung his head to see Solana, running toward the school, her long, flat quills bouncing on her arms and torso and swinging from the backs of her hands. Just beyond her, Tamron dove from the school rooftop, thin bands of armor spreading across his body, his tail releasing from his canvas bag. As he landed, he lowered his shoulder and rolled on the ground, his armor protecting him. Then he ran after Degraff, who had just charged off the courtyard and headed toward the back of the building. Noah glanced at the other scouts. Ella's jaw hung open. Megan's lips moved with soundless words, and Richie's eyes seemed to swim behind his taped-up glasses. The three of them couldn't believe what was happening any more than Noah could. As the four friends chased after Degraff, Sam flew over them, the wind from his wings wagging Ella's cape and tossing Megan's pigtails. Hannah lunged from the peak of the nearby house and touched down briefly in the courtyard before springing up and out again. She passed over Sam and then touched down on the top of the school's west wing. Degraff disappeared behind the corner of the building. "Keep on him," Sam said. As Tamron and Solana rounded the corner, Sam swooped over the rooftop and Hannah jumped down to the other side. The scouts turned the corner after them, and Noah watched as Hannah, in the air again, came down in front of Degraff, who dodged left, then charged out onto the playground. He only got a few feet before being blocked by Sam, who landed with his arms out to his sides, his wings open like a feathery wall. As Degraff ran in a new direction, Solana plucked a handful of quills and drew them. More than a dozen barbs studded Degraff's backside. The shadowist fell forward and tumbled through the wood chips. His hat fell off and rolled on his circular brim to a stop 10 feet away. The descenders quickly surrounded him, and then so did the scouts. Face down, Degraff writhed in pain, quills sticking from his back and hamstrings like needle-thin daggers. Noah tried to see his face, but could only make out a glimpse of his profile, his cheek, ear, and jawline. He looked human. It was Sam who spoke first. "Get up." No response. Degraff continued to squirm, his sweeping limbs piling the wood chips at his sides. Around him stood the play equipment, its beams and bars looking like fresh frameworks of puny buildings. Tamron kicked Degraff's leg. "Get up, before I make you get up." The shadowist said nothing. With his face still down, he reached around, grabbed a fistful of quills, and ripped them from his flesh. He howled in agony and tried to crawl away from the pain, his arms and legs slipping on the ground. After a few seconds, he stopped and lay there, his arms spread out in front of him, the soles of his black boots overturned. Then he did something that Noah doubted anyone would have imagined. He began to whimper. His broken cries were barely audible, but they were clear. "Get up," Tamron said. He reached down, seized a few of Solana's quills, and tore them from Degraff's back. "Up." Noah grimaced at the shadowist, howled a second time. After a few seconds, his howl softened to a whimper. "Guys," Noah said, "maybe we should..." Tamron held up a finger at Noah, an unmistakable message for him to keep quiet. As Tamron reached down to grab more quills, Sam seized his wrist, stopping him. "Hold up," Sam said. Through the eye holes in his thin helmet, Tamron stared at his friend. Sam said nothing else. In his silence, Degraff's sounds became louder, more distinct. Degraff wasn't whimpering. He was laughing. "You got to be kidding me," Tamron said. Then to Degraff, "What could you possibly be laughing at?" His laughter grew louder and stronger. Then he slowly rolled over, the remaining quills in his back bending flat. As his face turned up, his full identity was revealed for the first time. "This," he said. "I'm laughing at this." Lying before them was a man the Crossers had seen before. He had a thin face and sunken cheeks covered in splotchy freckles, and even in the darkness and fog, the color of his hair was visible. Red. "Charlie," Noah breathed. Charlie Red squinted his already squinty eyes and bawled laughter. His breath wafted off his lips like smoke from the mouth of a dragon. The Crossers stood there, too stunned to speak. Ella took a step forward. "Wait a minute! Was it you in my front yard that night?" A sudden peak in Charlie's wicked laughter confirmed that it was. "But," Megan said, "why?" After a few seconds, Charlie's laughter died down. "Why?" he said. He sat up to face Megan and winced at a fresh spot of pain along his back. "Why? Oh, you're about to see why? A deafening crash erupted, and everyone turned to see the two rear doors of the lower-level wing of Clarksville Elementary had banged open, slamming into the brick wall of the school. One battered door dangled crookedly on its lower hinge. In the dark doorway, a beastly leg appeared, then an arm. Something was stepping out into the playground. The creature had to crouch and turn its both bodies sideways to fit through the frame. Then it moved out of the school. "No," Sam muttered. "Impossible!" Standing just outside Clarksville Elementary was a Sasquatch, its mangy hair dangling off its muscular limbs, its bottom fangs pinching its upper lip. Its locked eyes on the crossers and sliced its long claws through the misty air. The Sasquatch was followed by another, and another, and another, more and more snaking their crouched bodies through the open doorway. In all, 6 appeared. Charlie Red continued to laugh from the ground, a sound that was suddenly more haunting than any that Noah had ever heard. Charlie led them into a trap. The scouts huddled behind the descenders, who lined up side by side to face their adversaries and prepared to fight. From behind them rose Charlie's voice. "Now!" Noah swung his head back to see that Charlie wasn't speaking to the Sasquatches. He was speaking into a walkie-talkie. And I'll stop the video there, ending chapter 45. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. As always, please take good care of yourselves and be safe. And I hope to see you guys in the next video, where we'll be continuing the read-along of the Secret Zoo with chapter 46, in continuation to see exactly what had happened with not only where Degraff's current position is, and the trap that Charlie Red had just led the scouts and the descenders to, and what could possibly have happened to Tank. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. Please take good care of yourselves and be safe.